Hey, you babe, thank you so much for being here. So, what is this? Who am I? This is a quick and dirty, rough around the edges, teaching sesh slash workshop on the theme of hashtag choose to challenge, which is the International Women's Day 2021 theme. I am Kerry Jarvis. I am the Audacity Coach. And the reason that I'm covering this is, or in this way, is that I was asked to deliver a speaking segment next week for my local county council's women's group. And in preparation for that, I started polling people on my Instagram about their personal struggles with choosing to challenge and the specifics of that and what's behind it. And the more conversations that I had in my DMs with people, the more I felt clear, like there's something here that can be shared that is going to be helpful for a decent number of people. Now, I'm going to try and keep this as succinct as possible because I really want you to watch it. And I know that even if you're here now, you might be a bit like, can you just get on with it? Because all of our time is precious. So, of course, I cannot cover off, every possible scenario or say things that are relevant in each and every setting of each and every person. But I hope to share with you some clarity about what holds us back and some motivation to move through it and some practical ways to support yourself to move through it. So let's get on with it. Also, you'll probably hear noise and shiz because, obviously my kids are here, always here. Two main reasons came up when I asked people, why do you struggle to choose to challenge? And frankly, it doesn't always feel like a choice not to challenge. Two things that came up. I don't know enough, and I'm afraid of conflict. That conflict can take many forms depending upon the setting. But they were the two main themes. Now, by the way, I have a ton of notes under my screen here because I want to try and stay on track rather than go off on a tangent. So I don't know enough could be like, I feel like what's been said or done isn't really right, but I don't really quite know the details. I don't really have the language. Like, I don't really know why it's not okay. It could be really quite sort of cognitively clueless, but just sort of a feeling that doesn't really seem like it would be okay. Or we might know quite a lot. We might know a fair amount about something and have kind of a fairly developed understanding and arguments, but have a sense that we won't quite know enough if someone starts kind of poking holes in what we're saying and puts it through a lot of scrutiny or asks us for alternatives, etc. We might not know that. So it can be quite varied, not knowing enough, which I think is interesting because it does kind of beg the question, like, when will we ever know enough? Anyway, it also ties into the second point, which is fear of conflict. And really, the risks of not knowing enough seem to be that we will fail in the conversation, that we will be disappointed in the conversation, or that we will disappoint others through our lack of knowledge, or that we will be judged for not knowing enough, or that we will maybe judge ourselves for not knowing enough. So those risks around like failure, disappointment, and judgment. So essentially what you might notice there are a fear about how we will experience the situation, right? So it's not really like, even if we said the fear is that we won't be able to change someone's mind, if that's the fear, then, well, what's the fear in that for the situation or for the advocacy? Because nothing's got any worse. You're not making the discrimination worse because you couldn't change someone's mind. So there's no real detrimental impact on the situation. The only detrimental impact is on us, like that sense of despair or disconnection that might find us when it doesn't kind of go how we hope it will. So it's all tied up in our experience, and therefore that fear of conflict and the fear of not knowing enough are quite entwined. So I wonder if you could ask yourself, like, what are the consequences of only the people who know enough speaking up? What are the consequences of that? They're quite significant, right? So let me take you through a few of my ideas about that. So if only the people who we deem to know enough speak up, well, the kind of proportion or percentage of problematic things that go on that go unaddressed will be massive, absolutely massive, because the vast majority of us feel we don't really know enough. We're not experts on any of this, any of the oppressions that we're aware of. So that's a pretty big one. We will continue to be on the receiving end or the kind of witnessing end, or be put into spaces with this kind of behavioral language, because our silence is suggesting we're comfortable with it. So we're essentially like, by not addressing it, by not challenging it, we're teaching people like, it's okay to speak like that around me, it's okay to behave like that, I'll tolerate it, I'm not that bothered. So we're going to experience more of it, and that's going to be stressful. Potentially, if we finally find the courage to speak up and to challenge something that's been going on for a long time, that can have like a really detrimental impact on that dynamic or that relationship, because we've eroded trust there with that person. So if you imagine you've been saying something for years to someone, and all of a sudden they say, actually this, and it's been making me uncomfortable for months, you'd be like, why didn't you tell me? You would be embarrassed, you would maybe be a bit hurt. So it kind of breeds mistrust and disconnection in our relationships when we're not honest with people about things that make us uncomfortable. And the final point I really want to make, and I think this is hugely important and something that we overlook in the sense of like what our responsibilities are, in terms of social justice work and stuff, is that when most people don't speak up because most people think they don't know enough, it perpetuates this kind of stigma around advocacy. So it keeps this sense alive of, oh, that woman, that difficult woman, that problem person, that one who makes a big deal about everything. It maintains this sense that people who are bothered about these things are in the minority, and that's really unkind and really unfair, unkind of us, essentially, not to share that responsibility with those people and to leave them deemed to be like unusual and hysterical characters, because we've created a culture where it's not normal to address injustice or oppression, discrimination, whatever it might be. So one of the things I think is a big step is for us to get really clear that our struggle or our refusal to be a part of challenging some of this stuff is not passive. Like, staying quiet is not a passive choice. It's an active decision, and there are consequences for it, for oppressed groups, for the people who do advocate for those groups, and for ourselves in terms of, as I say, experiencing these things over and over, and for the people who are speaking or behaving in a problematic way, some of which will be quite intentional and some of which will be quite unintentional. So where they're missing these opportunities to support these people to see things differently. Important to say, I think, at this point, that the more privilege that we have, the more responsibility that we have to advocate or to amplify the voices of oppressed groups. It's not all about us just holding the floor. So I'm white, I'm straight, I identify with my assigned gender, I'm slim, I'm middle class, I'm able-bodied. So I am essentially the version of motherhood, womanhood, and motherhood, really, that society finds most tolerable. Right, that's me. And some of that might be true for you, none of it might be true for you, somewhere in between. So when I choose to challenge, I am most likely to be tolerated. I'm less likely to experience any real risk to my kind of emotional and psychological safety, my economic safety. I'm less likely to experience a risk that is, substantial enough for me to be bothered by or affected by, in comparison to women who lack that privilege. And so what I'm saying is, we could all challenge ourselves around our willingness to contribute to a wave of change. And certainly the women, the people who have more privilege than we do. But please don't go after the women who have less and start making demands that they advocate or that they speak up, because it's not for any of us to make any assumptions about what is possible for somebody when their experience of our society is different than ours. Contribution is a word I mentioned there. Contribution. So, and I think that's a really key word that helps us to overcome this sense of not knowing enoughness, not knowing enoughness that holds us back. Choose to view your participation in challenging these systems as making a contribution, making many, many, many tiny little contributions, one after the other. What you're saying to someone when you challenge is, here is yet another space where you cannot say this or behave in this way without recourse, right? So we're each playing a part in closing down, closing down, closing down. Can't do that there, can't do that there. That person won't tolerate it. Okay, that person won't tolerate it now. So we're normalizing scenarios and contexts and environments where this is not okay. It's like passing the baton from person to person. I promise that I will close that down when it happens in my space, and then I'll pass it on, pass it on, pass it on, until we run out of spaces where this is acceptable or unchallenged. It's basically saying, I will not swallow my discomfort in order to kind of keep you comfortable. Instead, what I will do is I will hand you my discomfort, right? I will hand you my discomfort. What they do with it is up to them, and you can't control that. You can influence how that goes, and we'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. And hence the fear of conflict, the ambiguity. But handing it to them is a promise that you can make to yourself that you won't swallow that down and become poisoned and frustrated by it. You will hand them that discomfort, and it's for them to decide what they do with it. So to really try and wrap up this point, getting back to the focus on brevity that I was boasting about at the start, to wrap up this point, yes, let's keep learning. Of course, we want to know more and more and more and more, but it is a bottomless pit of learning that is available to us. And so also what we want to do, as well as challenging ourselves to build our knowledge, is to release ourselves from the responsibility that we've created for ourselves, that we must provide solutions or comprehensive solutions for everything, right? There's this real sense that we've created that if you're going to challenge, then you owe someone the full package, right? As if they've like paid you for this service, for example. And that's just not how it is. Like, it's okay for you to direct people to resources, right? It's okay for you to own the incompleteness of your knowledge. Invite them to Google it. That's okay. You're not claiming to be some kind of guru or oracle. You're just claiming your space as a human who values an equal society and saying, like, this is not okay with me. And the other kind of final point tied to this is that I think we can really all recognize that engaging in challenge is one of the key ways that we can increase our knowledge, right? So we're like trapped in this place of can't say anything until I know everything. But how are you ever going to learn to kind of anticipate people's objections? Or how are you ever going to be driven to find out like the answers to the things that people kind of fire back at you if you never engage in these conversations, right? So being involved in challenging conversations where we don't have all the answers can be a real catalyst for our own growth, because then we go away and look for them. Consider the intention for the conversation might simply be to have your concern heard, like to feel seen and heard, to have your concern noted or similar. Your intention for the conversation does not need to be, I will demonstrate that I know everything there is to know about this, and therefore they will have no choice but to admit that I am correct and change their behaviour. It's ambitious. It's very ambitious. And I am all for audacious goals. But this has to be sustainable. Like, we are in this for the long haul. It's a lifelong vocation, advocating for equality. So we've got to keep it sustainable. We've got to keep it manageable. We've got to be realistic in our expectations. If we've got dynamics where there's very little trust between us and other people, or very little love and care between us, then we are unlikely to get that kind of win every time, or if ever. So some kind of points for you to journal on, if you like, that might help you to move through some discomfort around this. So when I don't challenge, insert person in your life who exhibits problematic behavioural language, about problematic behavioural language, I feel. So, it could be like, when I don't challenge my uncle about making racist jokes, I feel, for example. And make this something that's true for you, something that is going on in your life that you don't currently challenge, and ask yourself, like, how do you feel? So what does it cost you not challenging it? As well as, having that awareness of that knock-on effect that we've talked about. What does it cost you? And then moving on to the ripple effect of that is, so what is the ripple effect of you not challenging that person? Thinking, reflecting on what we talked about earlier. How does my choice not to challenge meet with my personal values? So is it a good match for my personal values, or is there some kind of contradiction there? It's judgment free from me. Like, we are all in this together, big time. It can be overwhelming. It can be all of the things. So this is all with love. Next up. If I do challenge this person or this organization, I'm worried that. So what is it? Like, really get to the bottom of, what are you worried that will happen? What is it that you think is coming? And what evidence do I have that I could move through that if it happened? So the thing about fear is that whilst our anticipation of something coming remains ambiguous, like, I think there's a monster under the bed, or I think there's a burglar downstairs, whilst there's that ambiguity around who is it, what do they look like, what do they want from me, that's really terrifying. Like, actually looking under the bed, actually going to look downstairs, like seeing what's going on. Fear is much more manageable when we actually look directly at the problem. So actually asking yourself, what do I think is going to happen, and what evidence can I find that I would be able to navigate that, even if it would be unpleasant, because sometimes this stuff can be unpleasant. What else could be true or possible in this situation? So if you do challenge and there are some what we might consider negative consequences for that, like, what might be some positive consequences for that? What else might happen that would be wonderful? And that can be big stuff or small stuff. Who else might be affected by that? Who might witness it? What behaviors might that affect in the long term, even if there is some short-term gain, for example? What support do I need to feel better equipped or better resourced to challenge this person who I've let kind of get away with stuff for a long time? So you don't have to get on with this on your own. What do you need to feel equipped and supported and resourced? Have a think about that. It's okay to accept support. And that could be about, for example, like preparing language or running it by a friend, for example. What's a small promise that I can make to myself? So it doesn't have to be like, I'm going to march straight up to that person post lockdown and give them an earful about the last 10 years. But what's a small promise that you can make to yourself that's in alignment in some way with moving towards being more challenging? And finally, who can keep me motivated and accountable? Is there someone in your life who you can kind of pair up with or threes up with and support one another, bounce this stuff around, debrief after difficult conversations, etc.? Right. Here I am, absolutely failing at keeping this short and sweet. So moving on, the second big fear then, fear of conflict. As I said, very tied up with not knowing enough. I want to say it makes total sense to be afraid of conflict, and I wouldn't want you to ever be in judgment of yourself around feeling fear of conflict. We are social creatures, hardwired for connection. So any kind of risk of conflict can feel very like anxiety provoking, intimidating, scary, overwhelming, upsetting, unsafe. These are words that my clients use about conflict. That can be true. And some of us might have traumatic experiences associated with conflict, and we might need some support to heal those things before we can really get to grips with seeing conflict in a different way. So if that's you, please consider that. What can also be true is that what is true is that conflict is inevitable in any society. That's true. It's inevitable. What can also be true is that conflict can be a catalyst for change, can be a sign of growth, can be productive. So let's look to take the edge off our feelings about conflict by seeing it as more than this big, scary thing that we want to avoid at all costs. Conflict can be a door that we walk through to something better. Because we fear conflict itself, we can find ourselves entering into a conversation where we're challenging something with the part of us that is scared kind of in the driver's seat for that conversation, right? So some facts about the parts of us that are scared. I would love to know if these resonate with you. So the parts of us that are scared may use anger to cover up that fear. Tick, yeah, been there. The parts of us that are scared can lack capacity for empathy because we're just too caught up in our fear. And when we lack capacity for empathy, we're likely to shame people. And that's not conducive to progress. And also, it's just a horrible experience. The parts of us that are scared tend to favor like a single narrative, like can't cope with nuance and complexity. They're like, it's like this, and that's it. And again, not conducive to progress. And they struggle to listen. They struggle to listen. They just want to be heard. They're desperately grasping for kind of being heard, acknowledgement, power, a sense that they've got some kind of autonomy or some kind of influence over this situation. So none of this is productive and none of it feels nice. What I will say is your anger is valid. Your rage is valid. And rage is an essential part of social justice. Rage is the fuel for most of us. What I'm saying to you is not abandon your rage and love and light and all of that. What I'm saying to you is if rage is the fuel, don't put the fuel tank in the driver's seat, right? So you need the rage, it's the fuel. But in the driver's seat, you want something different. You want a different part of you, a part of you that is discerning, calm, and detached from the outcome. And I know it is very difficult to access that part of us. I know this well. Ask yourself and perhaps do some journaling around if you could imagine this part of you, like literally visualize her as a person like you, this part of you that's discerning and calm and detached and wise and compassionate and a great listener and empathetic and persuasive and all of the things that we would love to be when we enter into these situations. What do you see when you look at that person? Like, how does she speak? Maybe even like, how does she breathe? What is her posture like? Try to observe that version of yourself. And also, like, who are your role models in this situation? Who can you look to who is really great at this? Who you can be like, maybe I can borrow a bit of that person's style. So someone I find incredibly inspiring is Nova Reid. She is an anti-racism activist. She has a TEDx talk that you can view, I would recommend. And I did an anti-racism allyship course with her in the summer. And listening to her, like being in her presence, being in her energy at a time when things were more heightened than ever before, around racism in this country and in America, um, blew me away, blew me away. Her command of herself and the impact that that had, and her ability to move out of any kind of like egoic space into that much healthier space. We might sometimes call it higher self or true self or adult self. We can call it lots of different things, but really blew my mind. And you can witness that in her TED talk, in her writing, in her speaking. Go and find her on Instagram, Nova Reed. So yeah, really wonderful to have role models. That part of you is likely to be that you want to kind of borrow from these brilliant people's style on. And she's likely to be clear about her intention and a desired outcome for the conversation. And that is likely to take the form of a contribution, because it's our ego that says, like, I've got to convince this person. It's that part of us that's afraid of our lack of effectiveness and our lack of power in the world, that says, like, if I don't convince them, I've failed and I'm kind of unworthy and crap and useless. There's another part of us that says, like, contribution is enough, chipping away is enough. So that part of us most concerned with championing the meaning of what's being discussed and the point of view, rather than like championing the self. I hope this helps to give some context. Not always about winning, not always about winning a battle. Now, if we like this battle analogy, then we might say, depending on our point of view, we don't need to win the battle. We need to kind of weaken or injure the oppressor within this person, that part of them that seeks to oppress, or we might sufficiently nourish the compassionate, empathetic part of that person in order to, again, make a contribution. So how can you nurture this skill set? Because as you're listening to me say this, you're probably like, yeah, all right, but let me get back into the real world and this isn't going to last 5 minutes. How can we nurture this skill set? Practice it in low risk situations. So if you think about the fact that we've talked about some of the risks associated with challenging discriminatory behaviour and oppression, etc., as being risks around being judged, being criticised, being rejected as well. So in which of your relationships or settings in your life do you feel the greatest sense of acceptance and belonging and security and love? These safe spaces would be a great place to begin small experiments around your advocacy and your challenge, because there's an overruling sense within you that I will still be accepted here. Like, if I go too far, I'll be forgiven. I'm not going to end up rejected because of what I do here. So you could begin with kind of small experiments around that stuff. My laptop's like, low battery, you said this wasn't going to take long. All right, wrap it up, Keza. Or actual role play, right? So there's no harm or shame in you, again, pairing up with someone and being like, I've got this difficult conversation to have. This is what this person's like, and this is how I think they're going to respond. Could you role play it with me and give me a few chances to do a crap job of this, so that by the time it rolls around, I'm much better prepared, right? So it's not cheating, like, it's but like advocacy and challenge of this kind of stuff. It's something to hone and to work on. You might want to think about having like a bank of phrases. This could be one way in which you resource yourself, as well as kind of practicing. So banks of phrases that essentially like criticize the behavior, not the person. Criticize the behavior. So for example, let me read out this long criticism of behavior. When you, for example, make jokes at the expense of marginalized groups, I feel upset because I know that you are a loving, decent person, and that with another human in front of you, you would not maintain this level of unkindness. So when I observe this behavior from you, I feel hopeless and despairing and overwhelmed, because if you consider this to be harmless, what hope is there? I would love it if you'd be open to hearing about the impact of this language, right? So that's an alternative to, you are ignorant, you are upsetting me, I'm so frustrated with you, listen to me. So structuring our language, having these banks of phrases around like, when you do this, I feel like this, and it matters because, and what I would like or what I would love. So inviting that person to continue the conversation, inviting them to hear your point of view rather than kind of demanding. Now, as I said at the start, you know, a lot of this stuff is very situational, and not everything I say is going to be applicable in all contexts, but I hope that there's going to have been stuff that you could take away from here. I don't know what happened with all the tenses of that sentence, just let that go. I'd also suggest like seek spaces where you can debrief and reflect upon how these conversations have gone, or do some self-reflection in your journal, like, how did I feel during that conversation and what was beneath that feeling? So perhaps like you really felt the rage, like coming up the bus into the driver's seat. What was driving that rage? Fear of kind of losing, and what might you need to know to not let that happen to you again? Or, you know, fear of seeing that person kind of disconnecting from you. What might help with that? How can you state an intention at the start of the conversation next time that reassures that person, I'm not here to make you feel like crap. I'm here because I value this relationship enough to risk this conversation because I want there to be integrity between us. So each time, if you're willing to reflect upon how it's gone and what might have made it feel better and more supported, then you're bound to make progress. And what was achieved in these conversations? Like, what contribution was made? Where can you give yourself some credit? Because it's difficult, it's really difficult. Now, this could have been a full day of like teaching and sharing on this stuff. It could have been quite a good interactive workshop, I think, but all this idea around this has come quite late in the day. And have I mentioned the kids are at home, obviously. I would love to know what, if anything, you have taken from this. I would love to hear your thoughts and your experiences. You are really welcome to come and DM me on Instagram or to email me, hey@kerryjarvis.com. And I'm going to wrap it up and leave it there before my laptop battery dies. So happy International Women's Day week, whenever you're watching this or beyond. Yes, thank you so much for watching. Bye, everyone. Bye for now.